They called him a street boy, a joke, a meme, a boy with a soft voice and second-hand shoes, standing under a flickering gas station sign in the middle of a southern summer. But that boy, with cracked fingers pressing gently against guitar strings, with a voice that rose from pain and patience, that boy was about to shatter the world's expectations. In Augusta, Georgia, the air stuck to your skin like a second shirt. And on the edge of a cracked highway, just off Route 56, there was an old gas station no one really looked at anymore. Its windows clouded with dust, its signage sun-faded and crooked. But to Eli Reynolds, it was more than just a place with rusty pumps and broken vending machines. It was his stage. Eli was 15. He had almond-shaped eyes like his mother, and a voice that people didn't expect to come from someone like him. Young, skinny, and too soft for his surroundings. He was born from a story already soaked in rejection. He and his twin sister Emery were left in a cardboard box in front of a church when they were still in diapers. Clara Reynolds, a nurse who had just lost her job, found them before the sun did. She named the boy Eli, and even before he could walk, he hummed himself to sleep. Clara always said, "There's music stitched into that boy's soul." Eli grew up in a world where softness wasn't strength. At school, the boys with loud voices and rough edges ruled the hallways. Eli, who sang soul ballads and doodled lyrics in his math notebook, was an easy target. They laughed at his clothes, mimicked his voice, called him slurs they didn't even understand. But he never stopped singing. Every evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, Eli would take his mother's old guitar missing 2 strings and head to the gas station. He'd sit on an overturned milk crate, the concrete still warm beneath him, and sing. Not for fame, not for followers, but for tips, crumpled bills, and loose coins dropped by strangers who paused for a moment between gas pumps and the road ahead. It wasn't glamorous, but it was his way of helping Clara, who worked nights cleaning houses and always came home with tired eyes and cracked knuckles. She never asked Eli to do it. He just did, because love in that small family was never loud, but it was real. Then came the video. One of the boys from school, someone who had laughed at Eli a dozen times, filmed him singing outside the station. The song was Little Fires, the same lullaby Clara had sung to him when thunder shook their tiny trailer. In the video, Eli was barefoot. His shirt clung to him with sweat. He was singing with his eyes closed, unaware of the phone pointed at him. The boy titled the clip "The Gas Station Beyonce" and uploaded it to TikTok. Within hours, it spread, but not for the reason he'd hoped. Thousands of users laughed, shared it with mocking captions. "Somebody get this boy a record deal at a Dollar Tree. Gas so expensive, he gotta pay it with vocals." But buried beneath the sarcasm were people who listened, who paused, who replayed the last 20 seconds when Eli's voice cracked, not from pitch, but from emotion. And among those people was Michael Trent, a Grammy-winning producer, a man who hadn't cried over music in years, a man who, sitting in a hotel room in Nashville, heard the soul of a boy standing alone in the Georgia heat and whispered, "There you are." But Eli didn't know any of that yet. At that moment, he was just a kid with a guitar and a cracked voice, singing to the ghosts of passing headlights, unaware that the world had already started watching. He sang not to be seen. He sang to survive. And that was the sound that would change everything. If this story moved you, follow us for the next chapter. This is just the beginning of Eli's journey from rejection to revelation, from silence to spotlight. Subscribe now to Heart Story, where true emotion finds its voice. Eli didn't sleep much after the video went viral, not because of excitement, but because of the comments. Some were cruel in ways only the internet could master, mocking his voice, his posture, his softness, his bare feet on the cracked cement. Others were kinder, but distant. They shared the clip with ironic praise. They said his pain was aesthetic. Eli stopped going to the gas station for a week. He told Clara it was because of the heat, but the real reason sat heavier than Georgia's summer air. He felt exposed. as if the world had seen something it was never meant to witness. The private ritual of a boy singing to forget how much he didn't belong. But somewhere far from Augusta, in a downtown Nashville apartment lined with gold records and half-drunk coffee cups, Michael Trent hit play on that same video for the 13th time. There was something in Eli's voice he couldn't shake. It wasn't polished. It wasn't trained, but it had truth. And Michael, a man who had worked with stars and watched them lose their soul in search of fame, knew exactly what that kind of truth cost. Within days, he booked a last-minute flight, drove a rented car down cracked back roads, and parked 3 spaces away from the gas station that had become Eli's stage. He sat quietly in the car. He didn't approach. He didn't film. He just listened. Eli had returned that evening, guitar in hand, shoes dusty, eyes tired but determined. The jokes hadn't broken him. They just carved deeper into the voice that already knew sorrow. After 2 songs, Michael left without a word. The next morning, an envelope arrived at Clara's door. It had no logo, just a name, Michael Trent. Inside was a handwritten letter and a plane ticket to Nashville. Eli stared at it for hours. Clara read it once, folded it slowly, and set it down beside her cup of tea. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She only said, "Hollywood swallows kids like you." And Eli knew what she meant. She had watched enough stories end before they had the chance to begin. But this was different, and this wasn't a casting call. This wasn't a contest. This was a man who had heard Eli's soul through a cracked speaker and wanted to hear it again. Live, unfiltered. Clara didn't say yes, but she didn't say no either. So Eli packed the guitar, the old one, still missing 2 strings, and the clothes he wore, most often worn denim, and a plain shirt that smelled faintly of home. At the studio in Nashville, the walls were too white, the air too clean. It smelled like money and expectations. Eli stood barefoot in the vocal booth, headphones too big for his head, and for a moment, he wanted to run. But then he closed his eyes and sang the song Clara used to hum when the power went out. The song with no chorus, no fame-chasing hook, just the memory of a boy curled beside his mother, listening to her whisper through a night without light. Little fires. The room on the other side of the glass didn't move. Producers didn't speak. Michael didn't blink. By the time Eli finished, someone in the sound booth had tears running down their cheek, not because of the words, but because they believed every one of them. The next day, a contract arrived. Modest, introductory, but real. Signed and stamped by one of the most powerful men in music. Eli's name, on paper, in print. No longer a joke, but it came with a clause. Spoken softly, delivered like it was nothing. "We love your sound, Eli B. But maybe. Hold back on the personal stuff. Let's keep things open. Don't label yourself. It's better for the fans." He nodded, but something inside him flickered. He had sung with his whole truth, and already they were asking him to hide again. Still, he signed, because Clara was still working nights, because the guitar still had only 4 strings, because sometimes, to reach the stage, you had to play their game. But no one knew, least of all Eli, that the real fire had only just begun to burn. 12 months later, Eli was no longer the barefoot boy at the gas station. He was Eli Reynolds, the newest voice of American soul pop, headlining late-night shows, featured in glossy spreads, praised for his relatable charm and mysterious aura. His debut single climbed the charts faster than anyone predicted. The second went even higher. His face appeared on bus stops, streaming banners, and digital billboards in cities he hadn't even visited. But something strange happened along the way. The more famous Eli became, the less Clara recognized the boy she raised. Not because of the clothes those changed, not because of the music that grew louder, more produced, but because of the silence that grew between them. Phone calls turned into missed messages. Her questions were met with rehearsed answers. He sounded busy, tired, careful. There were things he wasn't saying. And Clara, who once held him through nights of fever and fear, now felt like a distant audience member in a show her son didn't know how to stop performing. Behind the cameras, the label had begun crafting a story, not of Eli the boy who sang lullabies barefoot under the sun, but of Eli Reynolds, the moody, edgy heartthrob who wrote about heartbreak but never showed his own. They told him, gently at first, to wear darker clothes, to stop posting old photos with his mom, to smile less in interviews. And then they introduced her, a chart-topping pop princess, blonde, bold, beloved by the teenage crowd. Their relationship was announced in a headline before Eli even met her in person. Overnight, they became the new power couple, feeding paparazzi exactly what the label wanted: a fantasy. And Lucas, the dancer Eli met during rehearsals for his second tour, became a secret. Lucas moved like liquid light across the stage. He listened when Eli couldn't breathe. He laughed with his eyes. He never asked Eli to explain himself. Their moments were stolen: a quick glance behind curtains, a hand squeezed too quickly in the dark. A whispered lyric meant only for one person in a crowd of thousands. It was enough until it wasn't. Eli watched himself in backstage mirrors and didn't recognize the face looking back. The eyeliner, the tight smile, the stylist pulling at his sleeves. The makeup hid the boy. The story erased the truth. And yet, he kept singing. Because the crowd screamed. Because the label smiled. Because Clara was watching. But the pressure built like static. Every red carpet forced smile. Every fake kiss was someone he didn't love. Every distance from the boy who made him feel real. One night, in a hotel room 10 floors above Times Square, Eli opened his phone, stared at his reflection in the screen, and hit the go live button without telling anyone. No makeup, no filters, no team, just him. He sat on the edge of the bed, guitar in his lap, and began to strum the first chords of Little Fires. It had been years since he sang it for himself. His voice cracked on the second verse, not from effort, but from grief. Grief for the parts of himself he had buried beneath applause and algorithms. And then, without preparing the words, without planning the consequences, Eli looked straight into the lens and spoke. "I'm tired of hiding, I'm gay, and I'm human." There was no dramatic music, no audience clapping, just the hum of the city outside the window and the breath of a boy finally telling the truth with nothing left to lose. That night, the live stream ended quietly, but the noise it created was only just beginning. The morning after Eli's live stream, the world split in two. On one side were the voices that had waited, hoped, even prayed for him to speak his truth. Fans who had whispered, "He's just like me," into comment sections. Mothers who shared the video with sons they hadn't known how to comfort. People who didn't care about charts, only about courage. On the other side came the backlash. Faster, harsher, louder. Headlines shifted tone. Fan forums ignited with accusations. Hashtags trended within hours. #boycott Ellie. #he lied to yous. #fake love. Radio stations quietly removed his songs from rotation. Sponsorship deals vanished overnight. And his label, without so much as a phone call, sent a single email. The contract was terminated. No explanations, no apologies, just a clean break. And Lucas, the only person who had known how deep the mask went, was let go from the tour the same day. Not because of a mistake, not because of performance, but because of association. The tour was postponed, then canceled, then erased from the label's official website as if it had never existed at all. Eli packed his bags in silence. He left New York the same way he had arrived in Nashville over a year before, with his old guitar, a small bag, and nothing left to prove. He returned to Georgia without a press statement, without a plan, without knowing what would be waiting for him on the other side of the door. Clara was still there. She stood on the porch of their worn little house, arms crossed, as if she'd never stopped waiting. When Eli stepped out of the taxi, she didn't rush to him. She didn't cry. She just opened the front door. And he walked in, into a home that smelled like old wood and lavender detergent, into a silence that didn't ask questions. That night, they sat across from each other. No camera, no microphone, no audience, just mother and son. They didn't speak much. But when Clara reached across the table and touched his hand, Eli let himself cry for the first time since the live stream ended. 2 years of distance collapsed into that single moment. 2 years of pretending, of pleasing, of hiding. The next morning, someone knocked on the door. It was a woman from down the street, someone who had once told Clara her boy would grow out of the weird singing. She brought pee. She brought a smile. She asked for an autograph. And suddenly there were others. Neighbors who had ignored Eli for years now showed up with awkward compliments and requests for selfies. Some claimed they had always believed in him. Some didn't even recognize the hypocrisy in their words. Clara kept most of them at the door. She knew what real support looked like. It didn't arrive only after the headlines. But through it all, Eli stayed quiet. He wrote, he walked, he played the guitar again, not for crowds, not for cameras, but for himself. And then a letter arrived. Thick envelope, gold seal, no return address. Inside was an invitation from a national television network. Not for an interview, not for a scandal cleanup tour, but for a performance. They had seen his live stream. They had heard the truth. And they wanted him to close the season's final episode with a song of his own choosing. No label, no contract, no scripts, just a boy, a microphone, and his voice. Eli placed the envelope on the table and stared at it for a long time. Not because he doubted himself, but because this time, he would walk onto that stage not as a product, not as a mystery, not as a viral name, but as Eli Reynolds, the boy who had always been exactly who he said he was. The lights dimmed. The studio fell into silence. Millions were watching. Eli Reynolds stood alone at center stage. No dancers behind him, no flashing visuals, no makeup team hovering off camera, just a microphone, a single spotlight, and the quiet hum of an audience that didn't quite know what to expect. The camera panned slowly across his face. His hands were steady, his eyes clear. He wore a plain black shirt and his mother's old bracelet, tarnished silver, nearly invisible, but heavy with meaning. He didn't speak. He sang. The first note of Mother I Kept Singing rose from somewhere deeper than memory. It carried every moment the afternoons at the gas station, the silence after the contract was cut, the weight of keeping someone else's version of himself alive. It carried Clara's voice soft, resilient, unforgettable, and the quiet promise he had made to her without words that he would never stop singing. Even when no one listened, the lyrics didn't plead. They didn't explain. They simply told the truth. When the world said hush, I sang in the dark. When the doors all closed, I followed the spark. You said, sing, baby, sing, even when you're breaking. So I did, Mama. I did. No one clapped during the performance. No one dared. And when the final chord rang out, there was no delay. The audience rose. A standing ovation not out of politeness, but out of awe. The video reached every corner of the internet within hours. It wasn't framed as a comeback. It wasn't clickbait. It was a moment that didn't need explanation. The next day, Mother I Kept Singing debuted at #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. But Eli didn't celebrate in a penthouse. He didn't party in clubs. He was on a quiet street in Georgia, walking beside Clara under a cloudy afternoon sky, holding a set of keys in one hand and her hand in the other. The house was white, 2 stories, with a wraparound porch and a backyard lined with lavender. Exactly how Clara used to describe her dream home when they had nothing but cracked walls and a leaky roof. She stepped inside first. No words, just slow steps across floors that didn't creak. She opened every cabinet like she didn't believe they were really hers. On the kitchen table sat a thick envelope. Clara didn't touch it. Eli did. It was from the same label that had dropped him. They offered a new contract, double the money, creative control, world tour. Eli didn't hesitate. He tore it in half, right in front of his mother. Then again, and again, until all that remained was silence. He turned to her, voice steady. I have a family. I have a voice. I have love. I don't need a contract from people who never believed in any of those. Clara didn't respond with words. She just pulled him close. And for the first time in years, he let himself feel the weight of peace. But Eli's story wasn't done. Exactly 1 year later, he stood on stage again, this time in a small, independent venue in Nashville, surrounded by people who had followed his journey, not his image. The crowd fell quiet as a familiar figure stepped onto the stage from the side. Lucas, no flowers, no grand speech, just a small black box in his hand. He walked straight to Eli, handed him the box, and whispered something only they could hear. The screen behind them lit up with a single lyric from Mother I Kept Singing. Even when you were breaking. Inside the box, a ring, simple, silver, understated, the kind of ring you don't wear to show off, but to remember who you are. Eli smiled, not the smile for cameras, but the one Clara had missed. And as the lights faded, he said, I lost the world once trying to be someone else. Now I gained the universe. Being exactly that. What would you do if the world asked you to hide your truth to be accepted? Would you choose fame or freedom? If Eli's story touched you, subscribe to Heart's Story for more true-hearted narratives where identity, love, and family find their voice. Your story matters. Let it be heard.